In a land shaped by rain and rebellion, where every hill hides an echo and every stone remembers a story, there lies Ireland. A small island, but with a soul vast enough to hold centuries of sorrow and song. Before the English kings, before the Norman knights, even before the shadow of Rome touched its shores, Ireland lived and breathed under the rhythm of the Celts. They were poets, warriors, and dreamers, a people who spoke to rivers and carved gods into stone. But time, as ever, has a way of rewriting even the most sacred verses. For what began as a land of tribes and mystics would, over 1,000 years, become a stage for conquest, for colonization, famine, rebellion, and the long, enduring fight for identity. Tonight, we walk through that story. From the first Celtic footstep on Irish soil to the tightening grip of English rule. A tale of a people's soul, crushed, scattered, and yet unbroken. This is the history of Ireland, from Celts to English rule. Long before kings wore crowns in Europe, Ireland was a patchwork of tribes, Tuatha De Danann, Éireann, and the Goidels. Peoples united not by politics, but by myth. Their gods were the wind, their teachers the druids, keepers of secrets, of astronomy, of poetry, of the soul. To the Celts, life was not a ladder to climb, but a circle. Birth, death, rebirth. The oak tree was sacred, rivers were holy, and stories were everything. They believed a hero's name once spoken could outlive the stars. Then, around the 5th century, a quiet storm arrived, not of swords, but of faith. A Roman-British boy once enslaved on these very shores returned as a man, Saint Patrick. With the cross in his hand and the Irish tongue on his lips, he spoke not as a conqueror, but as one who understood their rhythm. He didn't burn their gods, he blended them. The sun became a halo. The pagan feast became Easter. And Ireland, once a cradle of druids, became a cradle of monks and manuscripts. For centuries after that, while much of Europe fell into the so-called Dark Ages, Irish monks kept the flame alive. They copied the Gospels, illuminated their margins with gold and green. From the island's abbeys came missionaries, spreading learning and light across the cold continent. But peace, as always, never lingers forever. By the 9th century, sails appeared on the horizon. Vikings, wild and hungry, steering their dragon-proud ships towards Ireland's wealth. They came for silver and slaves, but they left something else. Cities. Dublin, Limerick, Waterford, all born from the clash of Celt and Norse. Out of chaos, Ireland began to shape a new identity, neither fully tribal nor yet united. And just as she began to steady herself, another storm gathered from the east. It was 1169. A Norman lord, known as Strongbow, landed on Irish soil, not for conquest, but for love. He had promised to help a deposed Irish king, Dermot MacMurrough, reclaim his throne. But what began as an alliance of convenience soon became the first foothold of English power in Ireland. By 1171, King Henry II himself crossed the sea, the first English monarch to set foot in Ireland. He came, he said, to bring order. In truth, he came to ensure no other Norman would become a rival. From that moment, Ireland was no longer an untouched island. It was a possession. Yet the English never fully ruled it. For centuries, their power rarely extended beyond the Pale, a small area around Dublin. Beyond its borders, the Gaelic lords still held sway, speaking Irish, upholding Brehon law, and resisting the crown's reach. It was a dance of defiance. Rebellion, entreaty, betrayal, and rebellion again. The Irish chieftains were fierce: O'Neill, O'Donnell, O'Connor, proud men bound by blood and poetry. They fought with courage, but not unity. And so, as England's power grew, Ireland's freedom frayed. By the 1500s, the Tudor monarchs, Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, had set their sights firmly on control. They called it civilizing. But behind that word lay the fires of conquest. Monasteries were dissolved, Irish lands were confiscated, Protestant settlers were planted in Munster, in Ulster. The old Gaelic order was dying, and in its place rose the first plantation, the seed of centuries of division. Then came Hugh O'Neill, the Earl of Tyrone, the last great Gaelic hope. In 1594, he led a rebellion that shook the English crown to its core. For nearly a decade, his armies outwitted and outlasted their invaders, until the Battle of Kinsale in 1601. Defeat came not with swords, but with hunger and exhaustion. And with it, the flight of the earls, the exile of Ireland's last native lords. Their departure marked the end of Gaelic Ireland and the beginning of English rule. What happened in Ireland was not just conquest, it was collision. Two worlds, one tribal and poetic, the other bureaucratic and imperial. The English saw themselves as bearers of law and order. The Irish saw them as destroyers of soul and story.
The conflict was never only about land. It was about identity. Who had the right to name Ireland, to define her? The English built fortresses. The Irish built legends. Each rebellion became a song, each martyr a saint of defiance. Ireland's tragedy was also its gift, a memory too deep to erase. In villages and poems, the language lived. Even under English rule, the Irish heart found refuge in music, in myth, in prayer. And so, when the centuries darkened, through Cromwell's massacres, through famine and flight, that same spirit endured. A whisper that said, "We are not yet conquered." The 17th century brought Cromwell, whose name still echoes like a curse. His campaign in Ireland left towns in ashes, people slaughtered, and lands stripped bare. To the English, it was divine justice. To the Irish, it was hell itself. By the 18th century, penal laws turned faith into a crime. Catholics were barred from owning land, from education, from parliament. Ireland had become a nation chained by law, by hunger, by silence. Yet the fire smoldered. From rebellion to rebellion, 1641, 1798, the Irish fought, failed, and fought again. Their strength was not in victory, but in endurance. Every defeat became another root, digging deeper into the soil of memory. By the 19th century, English rule was absolute, but Ireland was breaking. The Great Famine of the 1840s killed 1 million souls and drove another million across the Atlantic. For those who remained, the land felt haunted by hunger, by ghosts, by history itself. But from those ashes rose a new kind of rebellion, one not of swords, but of words. Yeats, Pierce, Connolly, poets and revolutionaries, began to dream of a free Ireland once more. And though our story tonight ends before their uprising, the roots of their dream stretch back to everything you've just seen, from the Celts to the cross, from the cross to the crown. Ireland teaches us this: empires can rule lands, but never hearts. A people's spirit once written in poetry and prayer cannot be conquered. For every stone that fell, another rose. For every silence forced, another song began. The Irish story is not one of defeat, but of survival. Of a small island that outlived every empire that sought to tame it. So when you walk the green hills of Ireland, remember, beneath every step lies 1,000 years of courage. Every ruin, every song, every whisper in the mist, they are not relics, they are reminders of a people who refused to forget who they were, and in that refusal found eternity. If this journey moved you, let it not end here. Share the story, keep the memory alive, and join us again. For history is never dead. It only waits to be heard.
When did people start getting wasted and more? Boring history for sleep. It begins, as most human stories do, with thirst. Not for knowledge, not for conquest, but for something simpler and perhaps stranger. A thirst to feel different, to loosen the weight of being human, if only for a night. Tonight we drift through time, through taverns and temples, meadows and mead holes, to ask one question that has lingered since the dawn of civilization. When did people start getting wasted? Before vodka, before beer commercials, before hangovers and bad decisions, there was a quiet moment, somewhere between the birth of bread and the birth of boredom, when someone, somewhere, looked at a pot of bubbling grain and thought, "What if I drink that?" And from that curious sip, humanity found both celebration and chaos. Drunken gods, sacred rituals, brawls and poetry. Fermented dreams swirling in clay jars. So close your eyes if you wish, breathe slow, and let's wander through the oldest bars on earth, one sip at a time. Before history had pages, it had cups. Archaeologists have found traces of alcohol older than writing itself. The oldest known fermented beverage dates back over 9,000 years, discovered in China. A honey, rice and fruit concoction gently rotting in clay. Meanwhile, in the Fertile Crescent, that cradle of civilization, the Sumerians were already toasting to their gods with beer, thick as porridge. They didn't call it getting drunk. They called it feeling the heart of joy. And perhaps that's the most human thing about it. Long before money, laws, or cities, people were already seeking joy that came in a cup. A little escape from toil, a liquid dream. In Egypt, beer was so common that it was safer to drink than water. Pyramids were built not on the sweat of slaves, but on the steady rhythm of liquid bread. Barley beer rationed to workers 3 times a day. Even children drank it. Priests blessed it. Pharaohs were buried with it. Across the Aegean, the Greeks refined it into art. They mixed wine with water in great symposiums, half philosophy, half drunken debate. Plato argued about the soul as his cup refilled, and Dionysus, the god of wine and madness, danced at the edge of every feast, whispering that too much order was worse than a little chaos. In Rome, wine became politics. To drink cheap vinegar wine was to be poor. To sip aged Falernian was to belong to empire. But the Romans, ever practical, learned the truth early. Wine reveals what's hidden. It tells you who a man truly is. And yet, through all this, alcohol wasn't just indulgence. It was sacred. A way to meet the divine, blur the walls between human and God. In Babylon, priests brewed beer for offerings. In Celtic lands, mead was used in marriage rites, a honeymoon of sweetness and delirium. It seems the history of being wasted isn't one of sin, but of spirit. And maybe that's where the story turns. When Rome fell, the taverns dimmed, but the monks, with their silent vows and curious minds, took up the brewer's art. In the cool stone of abbeys, they perfected the craft of fermentation. Beer, mead, and later, wine. The Middle Ages were not as sober as their sermons suggested. In every village there was ale. For peasants, it was daily bread. For monks, a quiet joy between prayers. For kings, a stage for diplomacy. In Northern Europe, alehouses sprouted like mushrooms after rain. They were smoky, loud, and alive, filled with laughter, gossip, and the smell of spilt malt. Even the word pub, from public house, was a reminder that drink was social, communal, a brief escape from the grinding wheel of life. But there were shadows too. The alewife, women who brewed and sold beer, became targets of suspicion. Their pointy hats and bubbling cauldrons later twisted into the image of witches. A cruel reminder that even joy could turn to fear when misunderstood. Then came the Renaissance, and with it, refinement, distillation. The alchemists, in pursuit of gold, stumbled upon something else entirely. Spirits. From Arabic al-kukhul, the essence. They called it aqua vitae, the water of life. It was medicine at first, then courage, then comfort. Brandy, rum, gin, liquid fire that could travel across oceans. The age of exploration carried not just discovery, but dependency. Sailors drank rum to stay sane. Colonizers brought it to trade and to enslave. In the Caribbean, rum was currency. In Russia, vodka became a ritual of endurance. In Japan, sake became poetry in liquid form. Every culture found its own intoxication, its own language for forgetting. And yet, not all stories of drinking are joyful. In every age, someone drank not to celebrate, but to forget. In taverns after wars, in lonely rooms, in palaces and prisons alike. The same cup that connected humans also revealed their fragility. Still, people kept brewing, because in a strange way, intoxication wasn't just escape, it was a mirror. To be drunk was to feel what one might never say aloud when sober. Let's pause here. Think about it. Why did nearly every culture invent alcohol independently? China, Sumer, Egypt, the Celts, the Incas, all found ways to ferment. It wasn't chance, it was longing. Alcohol was the first form of anesthesia long before medicine. It dulled pain, it softened grief, it made harsh lives briefly luminous. And it built communities. In drinking together, humans shared trust, a shared vulnerability, the willingness to be seen as foolish, open, unguarded. Of course, the consequences came too. Drunkenness led to violence, addiction, loss. Empires fell under the weight of their indulgence, yet humanity never turned away completely.
There's something sacred about the shared glass. It says, we are alive, we are mortal, we know how to laugh. Even today, when we sip coffee or tea, the ritual remains. Sit together, warmth in the cup, stories between sips. A remnant of those ancient feasts when getting wasted meant joining a mystery larger than yourself. Maybe after all, what people sought in the drink wasn't intoxication, it was connection. The Industrial Revolution changed everything, including how we drank. Liquor was mass-produced, cheap, and brutal. In the dark corners of London, gin became the poor man's comfort and the moralist's horror. They called it mother's ruin. Pamphlets warned of drunken women abandoning babies in gutters. Artists painted hellscapes of the city drowned in gin. The same substance, once sacred, now became the symbol of decay. Out of this, the temperance movement was born, not against joy, but against despair. And yet every attempt to ban alcohol only made it more powerful. In America, prohibition turned drinking into rebellion. Speakeasies bloomed under neon light, jazz swelled, and humans proved again, you can outlaw the bottle, but not the thirst behind it. Behind every age of excess lies an age of control. And behind every rule, someone waiting to break it, quietly, with a cup. Today, we live in a world that knows both extremes. Rehab clinics and craft breweries, mindful drinking and midnight parties. Alcohol has become both a celebration and a warning. We drink to toast beginnings, to drown endings, to blur in-betweens. Some call it culture. Others call it a crutch. Perhaps in truth, it's a little of both. But history shows one thing clearly. Humans never truly sought drunkenness. They sought transformation, something to remind them that beneath the dull hum of survival, there is still mystery, still something sacred in the act of letting go. So when did people start getting wasted? Maybe from the moment they realized that being human is heavy, and a small escape might make it bearable. But perhaps getting wasted is the wrong phrase entirely. For in every cup, ancient or modern, there's a quiet attempt to reach beyond, to touch the divine, the joyful, the fleeting. Maybe that's what the first drinker felt. Not rebellion, but wonder. A strange, dizzy whisper that said, life hurts, but it's beautiful. You've wandered through 10,000 years of intoxicated humanity, from clay pots to crystal glasses, from sacred rituals to silent regrets. Maybe you'll fall asleep thinking of ancient brewers, their faces lit by firelight, watching bubbles rise and realizing they'd made something magical. Thank you for traveling with me tonight. If this story eased your mind or stirred your curiosity, you can let it linger, like the last sip of something warm. Until next time, sleep softly and dream of the old taverns under the stars.